Hello and welcome to Computer Side Chat number 6. Today we're going to be focusing on amendments 11 through 27. Now, before you get into this video, you should make sure that you completed the amendment table, amendments 11 through 27. If you haven't done that, complete that and then come back to this video. Because what we're going to do now is we're going to take those 16 amendments and we're going to group them together. So that way they're easier to remember and we find the common ties that some of them have. After we group the majority of them together, we're going to look at the 4 amendments that don't fit into a single group and talk about the unique circumstances that revolved around those amendments. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, before I jump into this, I should just mention one thing. I'm going to talk about these groups. I'm going to talk about the things that the amendments in these groups have in common, but I'm not going to give you the exact amendment number. That's going to be your job to figure out which amendments fit into each of these groups. So that's what you're doing instead of taking a quiz on Schoology for this group of flip notes. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Now, let's get started. So the first group are what are known as the presidential amendments. These, very simply, are amendments that have to do with the presidency or vice presidency. So what are some of the things these amendments have done? Well, they've set term limits on the presidency. George Washington set the tradition that a president should only serve 2 consecutive terms. That was never law, though, and when FDR took office in the late 1930s, he ended up serving for 4 consecutive terms. He died midway through his 4th. Following FDR's presidency, one of the amendments passed in this group set the term limit for a president to 2 consecutive terms. Some of the other things these amendments have done have made sure that we elect a vice president. It used to be that the second place nominee for president would just become the vice president. Now we actually vote on who that person will be. Another thing this group does is list the order of succession if something were to happen to the president. So if the president dies, who will take over power from him? If the vice president dies, who will take over power from him? So on and so forth. I recommend before I move forward to the second group, it might not be a bad idea to pause the video, find the amendments that fit into that first group, and then come back to this video and just do that for each group. If you want to do it where you watch the whole video and then go back and do the groups all together, that's totally fine. That is just my recommendation. Let's move on to the second group. This second group of amendments are known as Civil War amendments. And these are amendments that were passed following the Civil War, specifically aimed at ending slavery and giving former slaves their rights as U.S. citizens. So, obviously the amendments you're looking for abolish slavery and give rights to people of a different skin color. So look for those things. I will also give you this hint. It is 3 consecutive amendments. So a lot of these groups have it where we're jumping all over the place. So one group might have like the 12th Amendment and the 17th Amendment and the 27th Amendment. This group, those amendments are actually in order. So keep that in mind. It's 3 consecutive amendments. Moving on to our third group. Our third group are suffrage amendments. Let's talk about what suffrage is before we talk about what these amendments do. So suffrage is the right to vote. If you have suffrage, it means that you can vote in elections. So these amendments all have to do with groups or people or places getting the right to vote. It's all about expanding the right to vote. So this includes things like giving African Americans the right to vote, giving women the right to vote. It also includes eliminating certain barriers to voting. So keep that in mind as you're looking for the amendments that fit into this group. I will also mention this. One of the amendments in this group overlaps with one of the amendments in the previous group. So, yes, you will end up having one amendment in group 2 that will also be in this group. So look for amendments that have to do with expanding voting rights or eliminating barriers to voting when figuring out what amendments fit into this group. Lastly is group 4, and these are progressive amendments. Progressive amendments were amendments passed during the late 1910s and early 1920s. and they were passed with the progressive movement in mind, which largely wanted government reforms so the government worked more in favor of the people. Some of the more famous people involved with the progressive movement were Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. Now, one trick to this is similar to Group 3. These will be 3 consecutive amendments. They will be in order. You may want to go look at the dates when some of these amendments were passed, because like I said, late 1910s to early 1920s. Maybe go look at the amendments that were passed during that time. One of the things I will tell you that was passed during the progressive amendments was prohibition, so outlawing alcohol. That is one of the amendments that was passed during the progressive era. So keep that in mind as you're looking for the amendments that fit into this group. So those are your 4 amendment groups. It's also worth mentioning that, again, one of the amendments in that 4th group overlaps with one of the amendments in the 3rd group. So keep that in mind. You will have one amendment in the 4th group that matches up with an amendment in the 3rd group. Lastly, there are 4 amendments we need to talk about, which are unique. There are no other amendments like them. They are a unique situation or a unique circumstance. And so we're going to talk about those individual amendments and the unique circumstance that revolves around them. So the first unique circumstance amendment is the 11th Amendment. This amendment said that lawsuits against states must be tried in state courts. Federal courts do not have jurisdiction or do not have the right to hear cases in which a state is sued. Why is this unique? It is unique because it is the only amendment that limits federal jurisdiction. Jurisdiction, again, being the right to hear a specific case. So, no other amendment has limited federal jurisdiction. The 11th Amendment is the only one that does that. Next is the 16th Amendment. The 16th Amendment establishes the ability of the federal government to levy income tax. So it allows the federal government to create income tax and tax people's income. This is unique because it is the only amendment that has expanded federal power, that has given more powers to the federal government. The 21st Amendment. This amendment is the amendment that repealed prohibition. So this amendment repealed the outlaw of alcohol. If you remember, that itself was an amendment. We passed a constitutional amendment to ban the sale of alcohol. This is unique for the reason that it is the only amendment to repeal another amendment. It is the only amendment, is the only time that we have overturned another amendment using an amendment. So that's what makes the 21st Amendment unique. Last is the 27th Amendment. And the 27th Amendment states that if Congress passes a pay raise for itself, that pay raise will not take effect until after the next election. So if I'm a congressman, I can't just pass a raise for myself. I can't just vote that, hey, I get a raise and it takes effect immediately. I've got to wait until after the next election. The reason for that is I might be voted out of office. So there's no guarantee that I will actually get that raise. Why is this unique? Well, it's unique because it took 200 years to get this amendment passed. It was first proposed and then was never heard or ratified until 200 years later. So that's what makes the 27th Amendment unique. It took 200 years to get that amendment passed. So that is a really quick rundown of the 4 amendment groups and the 4 unique amendments. What you need to do from here is go take a look at your amendment table and try to piece together which amendments fit where. We should be doing this one in class. So that means I will be around to help you. Ask me if you have questions. Some of these are going to be tougher to find, especially in the progressive movement, the progressive amendments.